Hey everybody! So if you don't already know me, my name is Robert Thompson. I'm the sole founder of Multiverse Creations, and this is the first video in a series. We're going to be doing streaming. You'll notice this is the only video that should be in this format at this point in my plan, which is going to be me sitting at my desk. The rest of these shots are all going to be top-down looking at the workspace, which you're going to understand a whole lot more in a second. So for those of you that don't know me and weren't part of the initial lead up into this project, a while back, a couple years back, I challenged myself to build a Lego computer chassis completely out of one set. And that set was the Super Star Destroyer. Built an entire freestanding chassis, no glue, no reinforcements, no any sort of cheats. The only things in that computer that weren't Lego based were the actual physical computer components and accessories, so cables, heat sinks, that sort of thing. It was actually fairly interesting. It was a challenging project. I really enjoyed getting into it. It got featured in CPU Magazine, which was a real feather in my cap. I enjoyed that immensely. But the biggest problem I had with it was Lego is not what I would call the most stable building material that there is. Common issues are that it doesn't transport well. You pick it up, things shift. It's basically held together by friction and, your own good fortune. So one of the aspects during the build that I noticed was the easiest parts to work with. Well, maybe not the prettiest parts, were the few pieces of the Technic line of Lego bricks that are used to do their more mechanically minded sets and models. Things like the robotics system, things like when they do models of vehicles that actually drive and steer, their RC cars, to the point that actually a lot of Lego systems now do incorporate a certain element of this Technic system, because the benefit of this Technic system is that it isn't based purely on friction. There's actually some spring tension in some of the connector clips. There's what would ostensibly be nuts and washers. Those are still held on by friction, but it's not a small stud in a small hole trying to stay together. It gives you more options. It also gives you gears and angled axles and interesting connectors. And so you can build these really intricate, interesting shapes in a very stable platform. They are more expensive. They're trickier to work with. They're not just a simple grid-based system. They don't just stack. You actually have to plan a little bit. It's a little closer to what I would say like an erector-style building system. Although, it's not erector sets, and I'm sure Lego would be very mad if I implied that it was. But it still carries that sort of more adult building aspect that is somewhat limited in the standard Lego building system, because instead of just building models of things and shapes and interesting structures, you can actually build robots and cars and interesting mechanisms. And I've seen factories that people have built entirely out of Lego, building other Lego. So there's all these crazy things you can do with the Technic system. And one of the reasons that you can is because it's a much more stable platform. Now, why is that important, you ask? Well, it's because I still technically have my first Lego computer. It is in about 50 different pieces in 3 different boxes, because it just did not stand up to moving around. It survived about long enough for me to get a bunch of pictures and actually run the computer for a bit, benchmark it, prove that it does actually work. And then I had to move it to clear out some space because I wasn't using it for anything at the time. And it took a little bit of damage. And so I went in to go fix that. And then other stuff broke and more stuff broke. And it ended up I took it apart to fix the stuff that broke because it was all inside. So it was frustrating, to say the least. So I don't technically have it anymore, but I do have it. I salvaged some of the computer components, so I'd have to reacquire those. So instead of trying to resurrect an old system that was flawed from the start, I thought I'd start fresh with a new take and a new challenge. So I don't remember the actual model number off the top of my head. I will find it and link it below the video once this is done. But the set that I used was the large wheel excavator set. It was it still is, I think, one of the largest Lego Technic sets. I think there was the extending crane was maybe a little bit bigger in terms of like number of components and density of parts. But still a very formidable set of pieces, so it should give me more than enough to work with. Now, as with the one I built out of the Super Star Destroyer, one of the aspects I love about Lego and their system is the idea of repurposing. You buy a set, you follow the instructions, you build this really cool thing, you get your enjoyment out of it, you have some fun, you play around with it, whatever, maybe you make some modifications, and then you take it all apart, you build something completely new with it, or you incorporate it with some stuff from somewhere else, you make something totally different that Lego had no idea you were going to do. And so in that spirit, once again, most, if not all of the components going into this build are salvaged components, or I would hesitate to say salvage. They're not broken, they're not trash worthy, but they are a little older. They're pulled from other systems. The only purchased components are some heat sinks and the power supply. Everything else was pulled either from my personal collection or some salvage computers that were still good, they just didn't have a use, or were missing some other components, and so I salvaged the parts that were worth saving. Other friends' component collections, so I kind of pooled a bunch of resources to pull all this hardware together. Now, that's not to say that this is a slouch of a computer. This thing is still going to cook. It's not top of the line, it's not cutting edge, it's not brand new, but that wasn't the point to begin with, and 90% of this build is about the system, the chassis, not the system. So I thought the best way to get started on this would be to give you a little background, like I've done, on why I'm doing this and some of my plans, and then go over all the components I've gathered as sort of an introduction to the kind of computer that I'm going to be building. And then briefly go over sort of the format of things going forward. So if you're interested, this is a great way to get looped into what to expect and just kind of get the word out that this is going to be happening. So the first thing I'm going to say is that this is not necessarily going to be a pre-scheduled thing. It's not going to be every Friday or every Thursday. It's going to be largely when I have time, which is unfortunate, I know, especially for a first stream. People want predictability, and I apologize for that. But I do promise to publicize when I'm going to do my next video, at least a few hours ahead of time, if not the morning ahead of time. But being as this is my hobby more than anything, or a secondary income more than anything, I do have a primary job. I do have other responsibilities. I do have a life. This is not something that is the only thing I'm doing, which unfortunately means I can't guarantee the same time every week I'm going to be doing this. And it's also a matter of when I am mentally feeling up to it. So it is a process. It is a challenging process. It requires a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, a lot of laying things out. It's not what I would call relaxing, but it is something I enjoy. So that's all the boring stuff for a bit. We're going to take a break from all that, and we're going to start getting into some of the interesting bits and getting into some of the hardware that's going into this. Now, one of the things that a lot of people who know me and know the kind of computer builds I like to do and the things I like about computers will know that I am very aesthetically minded. I like things to be pretty or to have some interesting feature that sets them apart more than just a spec sheet, because a spec sheet, anybody can build a really beefy computer if they throw money at the problem. And anybody who's got the time to work it out can build, you know, a not necessarily a beefy computer, but overclock a not so beefy computer. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. But what I really enjoy are the people who put their personal spin on a computer, put their signature on a computer. So, so there are some aesthetic-minded parts in here, and there are some parts that are in here because they were the only parts available. So Basically, the first caveat I'm going to give you going into this is not what I would call an ideal build. If I were to build, again, if money was no object, this would not be the build I would do. There are some things I would change about it, but that would be missing the whole point. It would be turning into just another thing that everybody else can put together, be throwing money at the wrong part of this, because the interesting bit is not going to be the parts that go inside. And ostensibly, when I'm done, any parts can go inside. So if I wanted to upgrade it later, I could. So we're going to start off with the heart of any computer is the motherboard. So this is a motherboard that I picked up from my friend Will. So he had, spare motherboard. And going forward, if I were to do this again, I would probably do this in an ATX board, not an ITX board. I love the ITX form factor for what it is. It does some really nifty stuff. It's very useful for the compact builds, and I certainly appreciate those. Behind me, that's my server. So I can appreciate a compact build. That's actually based on an ITX board as well. They're just very cramped, and if you're going to do any sort of a creative process that is going to be is going to need some leeway, an ITX board is probably not the one you want, because it's going to make your process more complicated. It's going to make for more planning, because as you can see, it's very compact in here. So you've got your 6 SATA channels, and one is the what was it? I can't even remember. It was like what it was called. But there was a, before M2 took off, there was this attempt to basically find a way to get more bandwidth out of SATA, and they basically just ran 2 SATA drive, a double SATA port, and so it was essentially like a hardware RAID within the physical hardware. But you can also use those independently on most boards. So unless I am mistaken, and it decides to throw a curveball at me, I should have 6 SATA ports. Not that it's going to be at all important. Sorry about that. So it's 6 SATA ports, not important for this build, and you're going to see why. So the main purpose for this build is going to be a living room gaming computer, just like a media PC, more or less. We don't really need 6 drives for that. You need maybe 2. The other reason I don't recommend ITX for a first build or a creative build or one that you're building off of salvaged parts is because only 2 RAM slots. Not a huge deal if you're not looking at building a super high-end computer, but it does mean that if you want to get the most out of your computer, you're going to have to buy higher capacity sticks, because you can't get 4 gigs, you have to get 2 8 gigs if you want to get 16 gigs of RAM. So price-wise, if you're building new, it's not that big of a difference these days, but salvage-wise, it's going to be way cheaper and way easier to salvage 4 gig sticks than it will be to salvage 2 8 gig sticks or higher numbers. Basically, having more slots gives you more flexibility, also gives you higher capacity. It does have USB 3.0 headers. It's got your standard 24 port. It's got an 8 port, which is somewhat unusual to find. A lot of ITX boards are just powered off of a 4-pin CPU rail instead of a full 8-pin. This one has 1 CPU fan header up top, and then it's got 1 chassis fan header. So not a whole lot of crazy fan management on this. But then again, that's not what we're going to be about, especially because this is probably going to end up being ostensibly an open-air chassis. It's not going to be enclosed. It's not going to be airtight. It's basically going to be, air goes where it wills. So on the back here, we can see a crazy amount of ports, way more than I'll ever need. But the important thing is it's gigabit Ethernet. It does have optical audio out. I'm probably not going to use that for my purposes, but it's still a nice thing to have if you're building an entertainment PC. It has DVI out as its standard default, which is nice because you can adapt it to whatever you need. A lot of boards will default to VGA. Newer boards have stopped doing that. I really appreciate that they have switched to doing DVI as the default. It does have 2 HDMIs and 1 DisplayPort. Knowing ASRock, I will have to check because I don't have the I/O panel for this. But I'll have to check because they had this feature a while back, and it's actually on the board in my server, that one of the HDMIs is actually an HDMI in, and that there was a keyboard shortcut to switching between the computer's graphics going out and the HDMI in, which makes it great for a media PC because you can plug in your console or your cable box or what have you into the motherboard, then route that out into your TV, and then you can switch between your regular entertainment and your computer at a button switch. Most TVs have enough HDMI ports that it's more of a bother to do it that way. It's way, way easier to literally just take the remote, change the input, next HDMI, you're fine. There is one caveat. Some newer TVs that have the 120 hertz refresh rate only have that on one port, which means that if you want to get 120 frames per second, or if you're 4K, 60, but the only way you're going to get that speed is on that one port, which means if you can route that through your motherboard, that way you can have your motherboard out from your media PC, get your high frame rate, and then flip that input over to whatever other input, your console or what have you. And then that also gets the full bandwidth that your computer's using. So like I said, I'm going to have to research that. I'm not 100% sure on whether that feature was on this board. I haven't found that out yet, but it was something that ASRock was known to do, and it's feasible as to why there are 2 HDMI ports on an ITX board. It's very uncommon, or at least in my findings. Bunch of USB 3.0 ports, no Type-C, because once again, this is an older board. The reason this is an older board is because we are running it off of, I'm not sure if you can see, no, you're never going to see that. It's running off of an i7-4770 that I salvaged. Now, because it's a salvage processor, I haven't had a chance to truly burn it in, which is why I also have an i5, just in case. Now, I'd rather have the i7. The i7's way nicer, but once again, when you're doing salvage work, sometimes, even if you've done a cursory test and made sure the parts work, you go in, you go to burn it in later, you find out, yeah, it technically works, but it's not particularly stable and it has problems when you game or do anything heavy. So ideally, running on an i7-4770, that is, I believe, a Z97 motherboard. That's one of the reasons I was looking at it. Yep, Z97E ITX/AC is the model number. It's a Z97. The Z series chipsets are always worth getting if you want to invest. If you need to save the money, you can scrimp on that. But if you've got the money to invest on a Z chipset instead of an H or a B, please do. You're going to have this much better time with the Z chipset for a plethora of reasons I'm not going to get into now. It's just an easy rule of thumb. So we're going to be running off of 2 8-gig sticks of DDR3. It's PC3 12800. These are salvaged from Dell's. It's 8 gigs of DDR3. It's nothing fancy. It's not particularly nice DDR3. It's not like the timings are paired preferably. They're not out of the same series. But 16 gigs of RAM is 16 gigs of RAM. And when you're building a media PC and you're going to be gaming a little bit, 16 gigs of RAM is something worth having. So next, graphics. So graphics are important, especially if you're going to be gaming. So this concept came about back when the Bitcoin miners, may they all suffer stub toes for the rest of their lives, decided to buy up all of the graphics cards that were worth anything. You could basically get like a 750 Ti. That was about the highest you could get for less than like 200% markup. It was ridiculous. First, they were all gone, and then in order to fight the fact that they were all gone, the distributors all jacked up their prices. So it was very frustrating. It is very rage-inducing. If you're trying to build a good system, and the system behind me is running a 1080 Ti. It's running the MSI Seahawk. It is the EK edition, which basically saved me $100 on the water cooler block. But I probably paid an extra $100, $200 than I needed to. It's very frustrating. So this idea came about back when that was going on. So I had recently replaced my graphics cards, switched over to the 1080 Ti. So before that, I had two GTX 770s in SLI. A lot of you will roll your eyes a little bit or laugh a bit because SLI is kind of not a thing anymore. It's certainly not going to net you much benefit unless you've already got a top-of-the-line graphics card and you need more for some reason. In that case, it might give you a little bit, but a lot of games don't support it natively. A lot of games don't support it at all. It throws weird glitches. You run into problems. It's not great. So I wanted to go to a straight-up one-card system for my main rig, which I did. It's now 1080 Ti. But that means I have two GTX 770s. And the problem is I liquid-cooled. The other problem is I didn't hold on to the heat sinks. Lesson, if you ever want to recoup your losses or resell any hardware and you're going to a liquid cooling system, keep your heat sinks because you can't buy them on eBay. I thought I'd be able to buy them on eBay. I couldn't even find them. So anyway, what I ended up doing is picking up one of these. So this is the Arctic Accelero Extreme 3. Now they make a 2-fan version of this, and they make a slightly thinner version of this. It's very thick. But this is going to be an open-air chassis. I get to design the chassis. Space doesn't need to be an issue. It was mildly disappointing because I was going to put the other card, which you'll see here, already attached. I was going to put this in my server. But the heatsink's too tall, and it won't fit. It's basically a 3-slot, even though your card only takes up 2. So that doesn't get. So I have a spare one, just in case the other one bites the dust. Now you'll see that over there on the back. That's the one that's going to go into this build. I'm going to actually put that heatsink onto there as part of the process. I'm going to show you like the unboxing, all of the cool stuff that comes with the heatsink, how to put it on, any sort of details. One of the things that I did like about the Arctic Accelero Extreme 3 is that it didn't come with a manual. It came with a link to a manual. But I also hated that because it was super great that they were saving on paperwork space. But it was mildly frustrating because it was like, oh, I got to go get the manual. Now, that may have just been a packaging error. We'll find out when we open up the second one, whether there is actually a manual and I just lost mine or they didn't put mine in, or if they actually did eschew the manual. So we had processor, we have RAM. Next, hard drive. So this is an Intel SSD Pro 5400S series. It is good. It's decent. I would rather have an 850 or an 860 Evo, or better yet, a 900 series Evo in an M2. But those are expensive. Those cost money. I didn't have them lying around. I did have this lying around. So it's a decent SSD. It's a 250 gig, decent enough space for what I'm going to do it for. It's not going to hold my whole game library, but that's kind of the point. I don't play all of my games in the living room. I play a few games in the living room when I want to be social and hang out with my roommate, play games at the same time, or if he wants to play the same game that I'm playing and he wants to use the one in the living room, and then I can use the one here, and we can play together. So 250 gig, decent SSD. You can't go wrong. Now the pile of stuff you see in baggies. So this is what I meant by aesthetic mods. So the three things that these are for, technically. First reason is I'm building a chassis. I don't have an I/O panel. I don't have switches. Lego doesn't sell their computer, or it doesn't sell their sets with computer switches on them for many reasons, but mostly because they're not for computers. So I had to buy a different set. So I have two different, it's going to be hard to see them. Let's see, we got them there. So we got two different resistive switches. You can kind of see they've got light rings. If I remember correctly, one is blue, one is amber. The label has kind of worn away. Yeah, amber, and the other one will be blue. They're sleeved in yellow. The other thing I have here is for case illumination. Now, if you've seen the excavator set, you may have noticed that they have a bunch of floodlights on the excavator, like you would on an actual excavator. And the interesting thing is that a 3mm LED will fit just about perfectly inside a Lego connector piece, Technic connector. And based on how Lego built those floodlights, two of these go into each floodlight. So I can do some interesting case illumination with these. Now the problem when you do that is that your motherboard doesn't have an LED controller. It's not built for that. So the third thing that I had to invest in, and it's going to be really hard to see, but that is just basically, it's the equivalent of a power strip, but for LEDs. You have a Molex connector, you have a bunch of LED pins. So that'll run all of my case illumination. So all of that, all of these baggies in this, came from performancepcs.com. It's where I go for most of my modding supplies, liquid cooling supplies, tubing, that sort of thing, interesting tools. They do a lot of custom work. They do offer like laser engraving, laser cutting services on Plexi. You can reach out to them, basically provide them an image file or a vector file. They can work with you to make it into something they can use, and then they will cut it. I've done a lot of stuff with them. They are really good at customer service. They're not the fastest in terms of shipping. They really only do FedEx. They don't have like a free above this amount kind of deal. So you're always going to pay for shipping, and a lot of the parts you order are heavy, so it's going to be expensive, but they have the best selection. They have a decently laid out website. It could be better, but you know, most of those modder sites are pretty homebrew. So as far as they go, it's pretty well put together. Wide variety of stuff. I love the custom services. They do a lot of custom stuff of their own in their own custom shop that they then sell. So super into how they do things. They have a lot of good supply. One of the things they will do is they will sleeve, if you order LEDs, you order switches, anything with wires, they will pre-sleeve the wires for you so you don't have to, which if you're doing a whole build from scratch, maybe that's a waste of money. It's kind of expensive to do. But if you've already done an entire build and you just need one cable and you've already sleeved everything, you don't have any more sleeving material, or you just don't feel like sleeving it, extra couple bucks, they'll sleeve it for you in the colors that you want, and then you don't have to worry about it, and then it's just plug and play. So I'll put a link to them in the description later, and they do really good work. I have never really been disappointed with them, I guess. But then again, I haven't availed myself of absolutely 100% of their services, so there may be some downsides that I'm not seeing. But as far as it comes for ordering parts and some custom work, they're a very good resource to know about. All right, so on to more interesting things. The new components. So the first new component is my power supply. I decided not to salvage the power supply. I've had bad experiences salvaging power supplies, and power supplies are one of those things that they either work or they don't. But if they don't work, they can take a lot of stuff on the way out. So this is the Silverstone SFX form factor 650 watt, or SX 650-G, because it is 80 plus gold rated. Now, I wasn't paying the most amount of attention when I ordered this, and it slipped my mind what SFX meant. Now, I knew a small form factor, and I was thinking length. I was originally purchasing this actually for my server, because right now I have an HX power supply in there, so it's like extra long, taking up a lot of space for something that isn't really getting a workout. So I was going to put this in. And then the problem is my server is a full ATX power supply system. And this is the most adorable modular power supply I've ever seen. It is teeny tiny. Fits in the palm of your hand. It's built for, I believe, specifically Silverstone's SFX small form factor systems. But I'm saying that there are a bunch of other systems that use this SFX form factor. But the takeaway is that it's very compact, which is super helpful if your space is on a premium. So that's the power supply. And it comes with a whole mess of cables. Does not come with a bag, which 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I kind of like it when they ship it with even a cheap, like just nylon fabric bag, just to keep all your extra stuff together. I'm not concerned because I have a place to store all those cables, but if it was somebody else, that may be a bit of a turnoff. So then next, and I'm not going to unbox this completely for obvious reasons, but this is going to be the heatsink. It's a CryoRig C1. CryoRig, it's a Chinese company. They're really cheap. They're very affordable. They're decent in terms of cooling capability. It gives me the same feeling that Fractal did back when it first hit the US market. They're obviously a foreign producer. They don't have a whole lot of following in the States. Like, their name doesn't hold a lot of cachet. But that was the same deal with Fractal when they hit the market. If you remember, or if you're been building computers for a while, or you know about the scene, Fractal is one of the best at minimal cases, like minimalist cases. They don't have a lot of features. They don't have a lot of crazy gadgets and gizmos. They don't have any crazy styling. They are a black or gray or white box. They will often have like brushed aluminum, things like that as in terms of accents. But they will basically give you a very minimalist system and then not a whole lot else. But they're built very solidly. The design makes a lot of sense, and they do what they do very well. And in the markets that they came from, they're very well known and very well respected. They just didn't have a following in the US market, so they were kind of a no-name brand for a while until people started buying them and realized, oh, crap, these are actually good. And then they got a big name for themselves. I think Fantex kind of had a similar experience, though not in the same way. But I think CryoRig gives me the same feeling that Fractal did back in the day. That it's a no-name brand, but their stuff is good and it works. So they're also very beefy. So this is probably going to be the biggest component in the entire system. But given that I'm putting it together in a plastic frame, I really want to manage my heat carefully. I do not need this overheating because it's going to then warp. It won't melt the plastic or set it on fire, but it will warp the plastic. And I really don't want to do that. I want to avoid that if all possible. So the last thing, I just thought this was an interesting thing to show you in terms of visualizing. This is the bin of Lego components. Now these have been sorted and arranged into categories and pieces, and then bagged and sealed. So this is a solid block of Lego right now. There's no gaps. There's no big pieces. And as you can see, like, it's densely packed. So that's a lot of pieces. I'm not going to dump it out right now because I don't want to lose anything, and it's going to make a mess, and I finally got them all to sit in a bin somewhere. But just wanted to show you some sort of visualization. I do have a picture, actually, of when I was sorting these, and I had everything sorted out and just laid across this desk. And it's impressive. And so I'll put that picture will be up on my site, and I'll probably link it to an Imgur post in the description. So that's all the components that are going into it. I'm not going to unbox any more than that right now because I'm not actually going to get into putting anything together tonight. But I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a brief on what's going on, what's going into it, what's going to be happening. So the structure that I'm going for is it's going to be when I do it, whenever I go on, I'll preempt it as much as possible. When I know I'm going to do work on this tonight, I'll make a post as soon as I know that's going to happen. Make sure to spread the word around. You can hop on, you can hang out with me. I'm actually going to have a laptop up here. I have a Lenovo Yoga 2, actually Yoga Pro 2, so it's very nice. But it's going to sit up here on the chat. So if you want to say hello, I'll definitely respond. I'm definitely into hanging out and talking to people. I will probably have the audio muted most of the time because I will likely be watching TV or movies or whatever is on the side, or having some music playing, because it is going to be a very time-consuming process. And when I did the last one, the biggest question that I got was, how long did it take to put together? And I didn't really know how to answer that because I hadn't timed myself. I had roughly a time frame of, it took several months, but that was on and off. It wasn't solid every day, 8 hours a day working on this. It was just when I had time. So I was thinking, I hadn't timed it. I hadn't recorded my time. I hadn't decided, I'm going to do it this time and this one. So how do I answer how much time did I spend on this? Well, I could tell you that it made it through the first half of the seasons of X-Files on Netflix, which was on Netflix at the time. To give you an idea of the amount of time this is going to take, and also the fact that I pretty much had to have something else going on in front of me because a lot of the building process will be very tedious and will have already been planned out. Some of it will be freeform. A lot of it will be planned out. I'll be basing, I need to build the motherboard tray, the various mountings. Those will all be very planned out and focused work. But once I have that, a lot of it's going to be figuring out where everything can fit together, not just in terms of physical space, which is very easy to calculate separately and beforehand, but in terms of the pieces I have and how they fit together, how it'll all work. And that is much more freeform because while there are a number of software tools and engineering skills you can use to estimate that stuff with Lego beforehand, I am not an engineer by trade, and I do not have access to those tools, and I've always built freeform. So it's going to be very freeform. So if you hop on and you don't hear any audio, that's fine. If you want to say hi, just poke on the chat. I'll mute whatever I'm listening to, hop on, respond. It'll be a great time. So it won't be this format of camera in front of me, desk behind me, because obviously that doesn't let me work on the desk at all. What I will do is it'll have the camera up here pointing down. So you'll get a top-down view. I have some previous videos, if you go look back on my channel, when I did the H80i swap on my server, of how this setup is going to go. It was a very top-down view. You could see everything I'm working on. It was a little far away, but that's going to be a necessity when you get the whole of my workspace, because it's not going to be a tight-in kind of thing. It's going to be very much a work on this piece, move that over here, move the stuff around. I'm going to need a place to lay out all the parts so I can get access to them. But so you'll get this nice top-down view. I will interact. I will have the chat system up, and you can come hang out and say hello. So that has been the introduction to this build. Once again, my name is Rob, and the channel is Multiverse Creations, and we'll be doing this a bunch more going forward. I'm expecting this to probably wrap up, I hope, by Christmas, by the Christmas season, because I don't want to have to think about trying to get anything done on this during the holidays. But on the off chance that I don't, I will keep working this until it's done. I'll keep streaming this until it's done, and you'll be part of the process the whole way through. I have a few nifty surprises down the line, probably more towards the end of the project, that I'm going to look forward to sharing with you guys. But for the most part, we're going to be building a lot of Lego computers. I'll talk a little bit more about like the design of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, the thought processes that went into what decisions, and a little bit on how to go about doing your own kind of build like this, and the sort of thought process that are necessary and planning that is necessary for you to find success. So last note is I will only be using the parts from the excavator set. I will not be using extra pieces. If I run out of pieces, I may have to tweak the build, because part of the challenge is one set only, no extraneous pieces, because you could buy Lego until the cows come home and have enough pieces to do what you want. There's no challenge in that. You could just throw parts at it. It's like, it's like any sort of engineering aspect. You can throw materials at it and over-engineer it, but that's not the fun. That's not the point. That's not the fun. That's not the part of the challenge that I'm interested in. So let me know if you have any suggestions or comments on ways that can improve the stream, make it easier to engage, make it more interesting, or aspects that you're more interested in, you want me to expound more on. If there's ever a desire for another episode in this format where it's more talking, less building, I can totally do that as well. I'm very open. Mostly I'm doing this because it was suggested that I should document this process, because last time I didn't. And honestly, in retrospect, that was my biggest regret with the process, was that I did all this work. I didn't know if I was going to succeed. I very well thought I was going to fail. I was going to run out of pieces. I wasn't going to be able to build it. I was going to have to say, oh, nuts. Oh, well, rebuild the Superstar Destroyer and just have a nifty model on my desk. But then I succeeded. And then I thought, well, I should have been filming that, but I didn't know I was going to succeed. And documenting something that you're fairly certain you're going to fail can be a very depressing process, because you're putting all of this effort and time and planning in, and you work your life around it, and you rearrange your workspace to be more conducive to it, and then it doesn't work out. And even if you're not streaming it live, even if you're just recording it for your personal use, that's still a depressing undertaking. And I'm doing this one live. So we'll see how this goes. We're going to see if we can actually pull this off, whether we have to tweak anything. I plan to keep working this until I have a working computer. So I'm in it as long as you guys are in it. So that was it. This is Rob signing off, and I'll see you guys all next time.